we're back. We are in the midst of a little mystery. We've been trying to track down where we left off yesterday, is trying to understand, does Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rabbi Shimon or like Rabbi Yehuda on the question of muktzeh? Welcome, my holy brothers and sisters. Hey, James Roth, telling us you're in from Indianapolis. We love that. Who else is in the house? What other cities, states, continents are represented? We are holding by Daf 46, page 46 in Tractate Shabbos. Hello, Yehudit Sobel from South Carolina. Page 46, we're in chapter 3, the 8th Mishnah. Third chapter of Shabbos was mostly about cooking and what are the prohibitions of cooking, what can be done, what can be warmed up, what can actually be cooked on Shabbos, on a festival, etc. But then we've gotten into this digression about the laws of muktzeh, right? Basically, that something which can't be used or can't be used for anything other than its sole purpose on Shabbos, so it's not prepared for other uses, so we don't touch it at all, right? It's a rabbinic ordinance that, for example, money or a hammer, which has no Shabbos, there's no use of those objects that can be done on Shabbos, so we don't even touch them and we don't move those objects. We just let them be. And this enhances our Shabbos rest, the honor that we give to Shabbos by really setting that day apart and not even coming near the things that are more related to work. The Shabbos light, obviously, that's intrinsic to Shabbos, right? We lit this light before Shabbos began so that we would have light on Shabbos. But that is its only use, right? And so since we set aside in our mind that the Shabbos lamp was for use on Shabbos, if we hold by the principle of muktzeh, then the Shabbos light has no other use on Shabbos, and even after the light goes out, we're not going to move that light. That is the halacha. The candlesticks that you use to light the Shabbos candles before Shabbos begins, even after the light goes out, after the candles burn out, you can't move that candlestick. A candlestick in itself, just any candlestick, can be used, can be moved on Shabbos. You obviously can't light another light in it after Shabbos has begun. But if you need that candlestick to hold something down, or because you need the place where that candlestick is standing, it's permitted to move that candlestick. But if it was the candlestick of the Shabbos light, then you cannot move that candlestick on Shabbos. That's the basic rule of muktzeh. Let me just make an adjustment on my screen there. Okay. So now what we're wondering about, and so basically what we've learned so far is that Rabbi Shimon does not hold by muktzeh, Rabbi Yehuda does. And so in a later generation, Rabbi Yochanan was very important, a very important sage, and we're trying to figure out, our sages are trying to figure out here in these pages of the Talmud, did Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rabbi Shimon, that there's no muktzeh, there's no concept of muktzeh, except in a very small, limited situation, or did he hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that there is muktzeh? That's our little mystery. Okay, so we learned that Rabbi Yochanan said in a different matter, right, another issue. So we're going to try to track down how Rabbi Yochanan actually feels about the concept of muktzeh by some other cases that came up. And so there was a time when Rabbi Yochanan said that the halacha, the law, is in accordance with an unattributed Mishnah, right? So remember, the Mishnah was compiled around the year 200. The Talmud was compiled around the year 500, more or less. So in the Mishnah, right, these are the earlier rabbis known as Tanaim, and they're going to be, generally speaking, the Mishnah is going to be more authoritative right? And then these later rabbis are commenting on the Mishnah. Now, the law can evolve, and even in the Talmudic period, as we're seeing, the law was not completely settled, and they were figuring things out. But when we have an anonymous Mishnah, that tends to be quite authoritative. If it's not attributed to someone, it basically means that everyone agrees with it, right? So Rabbi Yochanan certainly agreed with the unattributed Mishnah, which held that a wagon that had money on it during Shabbos may not be moved, right? Why? The money cannot be moved, right? And so now what we're saying is that this wagon on which some money was sitting, like you can imagine in the courtyard, this is obviously only in a private domain, and let's say that, now the kids, they want to go outside and play, they want to eat outside, they want to have a little kids picnic or something, or the family wants to have a picnic, they want to eat, and they need that spot in the courtyard where the wagon is, right? So we just want to move the wagon over, but the wagon has some money resting on it. If you hold by muktzeh, money cannot be moved on Shabbos, and neither can this wagon that the money is sitting on top of. Why? Because the wagon now is acting like a vessel, which is acquiring the muktzeh status of the thing that is resting on top of it. That's one of the principles of muktzeh. And that's why, for example, the candlestick, which we've said can't be moved during Shabbos if it had the Shabbos light in it, right? So if, for example, if this, it's not Shabbos, this is just a candle that I use, because we light up the darkness. But if it was Shabbos and this was a Shabbos candle, and we lit this candle, right? So then it's the candle that is actually providing the light, but the candlestick acquires the muktzeh status of the candle. And if it is very common, people have a tray, right? My grandmother used to have a tray. When she would light the Shabbos candles, there was a tray underneath, the tray for the Shabbos candlestick, right? So the tray also would acquire that muktzeh status of the candlestick, meaning that throughout Shabbos, you can't touch or move not the candle, not the candlestick, not the tray. And in this unattributed Mishnah, the wagon acts like that tray or that candlestick and acquires the muktzeh property of the money that is on top of it. Since Rabbi Yochanan said that the halakha, the law, is in accordance with that unattributed Mishnah regarding the money and the wagon, it must be that Rabbi Yochanan holds by the principle of muktzeh, meaning he holds like Rabbi Yehuda and not like Rabbi Shimon. But perhaps, as we saw yesterday in the case of a candelabrum that fell over onto the cloak of Rabbi Asi, and Rabbi Asi didn't move the cloak, and so we said, well, it must be that Rabbi Asi, who is Rabbi Yochanan's student, must hold by the concept of muktzeh. But we said, well, actually, we can't rule that way because a candelabrum has its own special rules. It had to do with being large or having joints, and it could come apart. And we were afraid that that candelabrum might actually fall apart and require reassembling. And for that reason, we had a rabbinic decree against moving the candelabrum, not necessarily because of muktzeh, but because of other considerations. So perhaps here, in the case of the wagon, there's a different reason. It's not muktzeh, but a wagon. I mean, it's a large thing. There's other issues that might have to do with a wagon. It's a vehicle. It could have other things in it. We know that the undercarriage of this is a related matter, that an undercarriage of a wagon is not considered the same vessel as the wagon itself with regard to the rules of if this thing passes over a corpse. Does the wagon form a tent over the corpse? We don't have to explore that whole thing. Suffice it to say for right now that a wagon might have its own particularities, and the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said the halacha is in accordance with this unattributed Mishnah might not prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds by the concept of muktzeh. So we go on in our investigation, and we come to this paragraph in the Koran. This is on page 210. We're at 46 Amud Aleph, the A side, right? Every page in the Talmud has an A side and a B side, like a front and a back. So we're still on 46A. And here, what we're going to see is that a certain rabbi, Rabbi Abahu, right, if we were wondering, if we asked the same question of him, like the way we're asking now, does Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda? If we ask the same question of Rabbi Abahu, who does he hold like? Let's see if we can get an answer from this little paragraph, right? It is told that Rav Malkiah happened to come to the house of Rabbi Simlai and moved an extinguished oil lamp, right? So this is an oil lamp. Now this is one of these cases where Rabbi Shimon permits. The oil lamp, the Shabbos lamp, while the light is lit, Rabbi Shimon would agree that you can't move the lamp because you might come to extinguish it. But after the light goes out, right? After the wick goes out, it was blown out by the wind or it just ran out of oil. So if you hold by muktzeh, you can't move that lamp for the rest of Shabbos. If you don't hold by muktzeh, you can move the lamp after the light goes out. So this Rabbi Malkiah happened to come to the house of Rabbi Simlai and moved an extinguished oil lamp. And Rabbi Simlai became angry, as in his opinion, it is prohibited to move an oil lamp because it is set aside. Likewise, Rabbi Yosei the Galilean happened to come to the place of Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Chanina, and he moved an oil lamp, and Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Chanina, became angry. Obviously, this rabbi who lives there holds by the concept of muktzeh, and his guest doesn't, right? So he didn't like that he came over and did that. So the Gemara also relates that Rabbi Abahu, when he happened to come to the place of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, he would move an oil lamp. However, when he happened to come to the place of Rabbi Yochanan, he would not move an oil lamp. So it seems that Rabbi Abahu, when he was by Yehoshua ben Levi's house, he would move the oil lamp. Perhaps because Yehoshua ben Levi does not hold by the concept of muktzeh. The thing is not set aside, so the oil lamp, after it's extinguished, can be moved. But when Rabbi Abahu would visit the home of Rabbi Yochanan, who it appears does hold by the concept of muktzeh, so now Rabbi Abahu would behave like his host. The first two examples, the rabbi would just stick to his own principle, even though he was in the home of somebody who held by the other philosophy, right? The other approach, held differently. But Rabbi Abahu, he would act like the person whose home he was visiting, the way that sage held with regards to muktzeh, right? So when he was at the place of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Abahu would move the lamp. However, when he happened to come to the place of Rabbi Yochanan, he would not move an oil lamp. The Gemara wondered, whichever way you look at it, there's a difficulty. If he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, let him act in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda everywhere. Rabbi Yehuda holds that there is a concept of muktzeh. So if Rabbi Abahu agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, who says there is muktzeh, so then why doesn't he behave that way wherever he goes, right? And if he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that there is not muktzeh, let him act in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon everywhere and move the oil lamp. The Gemara answers, actually, it can be explained that Rabbi Abahu holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that there is not muktzeh. However, in deference to Rabbi Yochanan, he did not act accordingly so as not to act contrary to his ruling in the place where he was the authority, right? So Rabbi Abahu agreed with Rabbi Shimon that there's no such thing as muktzeh except in certain very limited situations. But if he was, going to spend Shabbos at Rabbi Yochanan's place, and Rabbi Yochanan was such a big and important sage, the authority for that region, then he was going to act in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan's principle. So we learn two things from this paragraph. Number one, Rabbi Yochanan did indeed hold like Rabbi Yehuda on the question of muktzeh. Things have to be prepared for Shabbos. If they are not prepared for use on Shabbos, they have for various reasons, then muktzeh kicks in, and that is a thing that you just can't touch. at all, not move it, not touch it, for all of Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda on that. But Rabbi Abba, who doesn't agree with that principle, he holds like Rabbi Shimon, still will be respectful when he goes by Rabbi Yochanan. And so here we see that we both have the absolute principle of holding by the law according to the law as you understand it, and giving deference, right, to people who have a local authority and who perhaps are older and more learned than you, right? So you do both, right? There's both a time to be principled and absolutely hold the law the way you see it, and there's a time to be a little more flexible as long as you're deferring to a recognized Torah authority. And that's what we learned from Rabbi Abahu's behavior in changing his behavior depending on whose house he was at. In this case, they're all Torah authorities, right? It's not that, and then if he goes to somebody who's just got a ridiculous ruling that has nothing to do with the Torah law, that Rabbi Abahu's going to just act like that guy. It's just that we see that even where people are completely pious and trying to follow the Torah in every aspect of their lives, they're all sages, and yet they disagree. So what happens when sages disagree, right? And what happens if a sage is going from one sage's house to another? What is he to do? It's a problem, because if he himself is a sage and he's changing his behavior depending on whose house he visits, then what do his students learn from him? That's a tough question, right? Okay. So Rabbi Bahu changes. We prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda on the concept of muktzeh. Now Abaye raises a contradiction. Now that we've concluded, okay, so Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda, there is muktzeh. And Rabbi Shimon, as we've established, doesn't hold by the concept of muktzeh. But now here comes Abaye and says, wait a minute, we've been assuming that Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by the concept of muktzeh, the concept of set aside during Shabbos. Is that a valid assumption? Let us see. So Rabbi Shimon says you can use the oil left over in a lamp on Shabbos after the light has been extinguished. That would imply that he does not hold by the concept of muktzeh. Okay. But on a different issue, where he says that you cannot shecht a bechor that developed a blemish on a festival. So this needs to be explained. So a bechor is the firstborn. The firstborn of a kosher animal, right? So a kosher animal means that it's kosher to eat. That could be a cow, a sheep, or a goat, let's say, right? For now. There's other animals that could count too, but for now, let's assume it's either a cow, a sheep, or a goat. So the firstborn of the womb of this kosher animal, actually, it needs to be sacrificed. As the law stood when the temple stood in ancient Israel, it's one more of these reminders that God runs the world, right? God controls the world. We're just we're tenants in God's world, right? And so it's a gift that God allows us, to have the wealth of having animals, and having a sheep that has lambs, right? And we can use, over the years, the lambs can become the Pesach dinner, the dinner at Passover, the Pesach offering, etc. But the first one that comes from this, this breeding animal, we sacrifice it. And a special kind of sacrifice, the sacrifice of the Bechor. The priest can eat it. We can eat. There's circumstances where people can eat some of it too. But the point is that the firstborn is set aside for that special sacrifice. So if you have, let's say you own a lot of sheep, one particular lamb, right, is the firstborn of, its mother. So that sheep, that firstborn, that lamb, is consecrated for holy use. We can't eat it, right? It's going to be sacrificed. It's going to be taken to Jerusalem, or it's going to be given to a priest. right now we're not talking about the laws of sacrifice, other than the fact that the firstborn is set aside as holy. It's holy. It's consecrated for use for a sacrifice. But if this consecrated firstborn of that particular mother sheep develops a blemish, a disqualifying blemish, so now it's no good to be used as a sacrifice. In order to determine that this blemish is indeed a disqualifying blemish, you actually have to bring an expert, right? So there were people who were educated for this purpose. They were priests, actually, Cohens, who would come over and say, yeah, that is a disqualifying blemish, so now you can eat it, right? Now, since it's unfit for a sacrifice, it loses that consecrated status and it becomes available to eat, okay? So let's say that during a festival like Sukkot, right? So we have an 8-day holiday in the fall. So at the beginning of the festival, that Bechor, that firstborn, it was consecrated. We knew it was set aside. We knew we wouldn't be able to eat it for all of our festivities during the 8-day festival. But after the festival began, that little lamb developed a blemish. And it looked like a disqualifying blemish. And then we brought a priest over and he said, yep, that's a disqualifying blemish. So now that lamb becomes available to be eaten. At the beginning of the festival, for sure, we didn't have in mind that we might end up eating it because it was consecrated. It was going to be used for sacrifice. There was no way we were going to be able to eat it. But after the festival began, it developed the blemish. It developed a disqualifying blemish. It was shown to a competent authority, and he indeed said, yes, it is a disqualifying blemish. And only then did it become available to be slaughtered and cooked and eaten during the festival. So, if we hold by the concept of muktzeh, that a thing has to be prepared for use on the festival, and if it's not, if we didn't have in mind that we would be using it on the festival, then it becomes muktzeh and it remains unavailable throughout the festival. So if we don't hold by muktzeh, if we hold by muktzeh, then we can't, even though it has a disqualifying blemish, we're not going to be able to eat it because it's muktzeh. And Rabbi Shimon, who does not hold by muktzeh, says that in the case of this Bechor, this firstborn that developed a blemish during the festival, no, you cannot eat it. So that would imply that Rabbi Shimon does hold by the concept of muktzeh. So Abaye has raised a contradiction. In the case of the oil lamp that became extinguished during Shabbos, Rabbi Shimon says you can use oil from that lamp, leftover oil, and you can move the lamp. So that means that he doesn't hold by the concept of muktzeh. But in the case of the Bechor that develops a blemish during the festival, he says you cannot eat it. That would imply that he does hold by the concept of muktzeh. What are we to make of this contradiction? Well, perhaps the issue is that Rabbi Shimon distinguishes between decrees. Perhaps there's a distinction that Rabbi Shimon makes between Torah laws and rabbinic decrees. What do we mean by that in this situation? Okay, we've already said that Rabbi Shimon says you can move the lamp, the Shabbos lamp, after it was extinguished, after it ran out of oil or the wind blew it out for whatever reason, it was out. Then, if there's leftover oil, you could use that oil, or if you wanted to move the lamp, you could move the lamp. That implies that while the lamp is lit, you cannot move the lamp. Why can't you move the lamp while it's lit? Is it because the lamp is muktzeh and you can't move the lamp all through Shabbos? No, we know that's not the reason because he doesn't hold by muktzeh in the case of the Shabbos lamp. The reason that Rabbi Shimon says you can't move the lamp while it is lit is because you might come to extinguish the lamp. In moving it, you might do something wrong that extinguishes the lamp. And then you would be violating the Torah prohibition on extinguishing a flame. That is definitely a Torah prohibition. You cannot kindle a flame during Shabbos. You can't extinguish a flame during Shabbos. Now, we've been taking that as a given. But hold on a second. We also learned that Rabbi Shimon said, if you perform an unintentional act that results in a prohibited labor, you are exempt from bringing a sin offering from that. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him and says you are liable. The classic example of that is you want to move a bench on Shabbos, right? Some extra people came to your Shabbos lunch, and so you want to bring a bench from the other room into the dining room so they have a place to sit and eat. If it's possible that in dragging that bench across the dirt floor of your Talmudic era house, you're going to create a furrow in the dirt, you have a problem because creating a furrow is equivalent to plowing, right? It's the same as like when we plow a farm field and then we go ahead and put seeds in it, like planting a field. That's definitely a forbidden, plowing is a forbidden labor on Shabbos. And so we say that Rabbi Shimon says, well, you didn't intend to create a furrow, you intended to move a bench. It was possible that you would create a furrow, but it was not inevitable that you would create a furrow. So we don't worry about the fact that your unintentional furrow was created. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said, if you knew there was a chance that that could happen and you did it anyway, so then you violated Shabbos and you have to bring a sin offering. That's that very important and basic conflict between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. They disagree on the concept of muktzeh, but they especially disagree on the concept of unintentional violation of a Shabbos law. So if Rabbi Shimon says you can move the bench even if it creates the furrow because you didn't intend to create the furrow, why is it that Rabbi Shimon also says you cannot move a Shabbos lamp because you might come to extinguish it? According to his principle of the unintentional act, what difference does it make if you extinguish the Shabbos lamp? Your intent was to move the Shabbos lamp. You didn't intend to violate the Torah law of extinguishing it. You intended to move the lamp. It was an unintentional act that by mistake you came to extinguish it when you were moving the lamp. And yet Rabbi Shimon does hold that way. And so from this we learn that apparently Rabbi Shimon, in his law of the it's okay to do a permitted labor that might result in a prohibited labor as long as that was unintentional. He seems to be making a distinction between if that unintentional act is going to violate a Torah law or a rabbinic law. Because extinguishing a flame on Shabbos, that's a Torah law. But creating a furrow in a dirt floor, that's a rabbinic law. It's not full-fledged plowing. We only consider making a furrow in a dirt floor of a house to be like plowing according to a rabbinic decree. It's a rabbinic decree to say that you can't, drag your finger through a dirt floor and make a furrow because that's like plowing. It's not plowing. You're never going to put seeds in that little groove that you made in the dirt floor. But by rabbinic decree, that little furrow in the dirt floor is considered plowing. So Rabbi Shimon seems to be saying you have to make a distinction between the Torah law and the rabbinic law. If your unintentional act is going to violate a rabbinic law, then you can't do it, right? Then you have to be that much more careful to not do the permitted labor that might result in that unintentional act if the unintentional act is going to violate a Torah law. But if the unintentional act is just going to violate a rabbinic law, then he's more lenient, right? And it's in that case where Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to worry about the unintended consequence of your permitted labor if it's only going to violate the rabbinic decree. So that's where we are right now in our understanding of how Rabbi Shimon holds, right? No, there's not muktzeh, except in certain very limited cases. And yes, you can perform a permitted labor that might result an unintentional violation of a rabbinic decree, but you cannot perform a permitted labor that might result in an unintentional violation of a Torah law. That's where we are with our understanding of what Rabbi Shimon holds, what Rabbi Yehuda holds, and the fact that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda on the concept of muktzeh, but Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Shimon on the concept of unintentional consequence of a permitted labor on Shabbos. And now we understand a little better, well, how can you hold like one guy on this matter and like this other guy on another matter? Does a sage need to be consistent in terms of who he follows? Depends, right? Maybe he has his own truth sense that he's trying to be true to the principle as he sees it. And so he sees it one way in this law and he sees it another way on this other law. Or perhaps what's actually happening is he's being respectful of people when he's in their, jurisdiction, as it were, in their region of authority, and respectful to someone else when he's in their region of authority, which was the case with Rabbi Abahu when he was visiting either Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who held like Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Yochanan, who held like Rabbi Yehuda on the concept of muktzeh. That's where we are today. Let me check the comments to see if there are any questions here. What's like that? Okay, I see on the YouTube side, Christine Clay is with us from Cleveland and Deborah from Florida. Over here on the Facebook side, Stephen Giger says, are two people prohibited from simply picking up the bench and moving it without creating a furrow? No, they're not. That would be much better if they could pick up the bench. They should pick up the bench within the house. It's okay because that bench is not muktzeh. The bench is prepared. People had it in mind that during Shabbos they'd use the bench, so they certainly can move the bench. And if they can move without creating a furrow, all the better. But what if what they're moving is a bed, right? What if it's something heavier and they're just not going to be able to move it without creating the furrow, or at least with the chance of creating a furrow? And that's what we're getting at, right? They're not going to be able to be certain that they won't have that unintentional violation of the prohibition. And Carolyn Dobson Chavez says, can Nina share her recipe for the key bread, for the key challah? You see that, Nina? I'm not sure if you're listening. She's in the house right now. But the key challah, by the way, it's the same recipe as her regular challah. What made it different was the shape. And if you're curious what a key challah is and why we make a challah in the shape of a key for the first Shabbos after Passover, go into the Accidental Talmudist news feed, and I shared that on Friday, just before Shabbat came in, and we showed the key challah, and we told the story of why we make a key-shaped challah for that Shabbos right after Passover. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and with God's help, we will be learning page 47 and completing chapter 3 and moving on to chapter 4, which is all about how may we insulate hot foods during Shabbos, and more importantly, what are the principles behind those rules. This muktzeh, it's so difficult, so complicated, so nuanced, but the more we study it, the more we start to understand how the sages arrive at their conclusion, what it is that they're trying, what are the sort of conflicting principles that they are endeavoring to balance so that we can, in the end, do God's will, right? Because that's what this is all about. We're not just, looking at the picayune details of these laws for no reason. We're doing it because we want to understand God's will for us in every situation, right? And as you'll see later this week, in next week's Torah portion, because I just wrote my piece for next week. Next week in next week's Torah portion, we have the verse, God says to Moses, gather all the people, not just pass this law to them, but make sure that everyone is assembled in order to hear this law, and then says to him, you shall be holy because I am holy. Why does God say you shall be holy because I am holy? I'll explain that next week. But if we are going to be a holy nation, okay, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the holy way to behave in every aspect of our lives? And that is what we're doing here. All the best, my holy brothers and sisters.